Okay, so I am your chair for this session, Louise McAward-White from Fair Museum Jobs, and I am so thrilled to be chairing this session about unions in the heritage sector. It's something that through 2020 has become very speedily close to my heart as I became a BECTU rep in my workplace in February it was, and it's been a crash course this year on everything to do with unions. So I'm really pleased to be able to have this session today. I'm going to let my panel introduce themselves, and they're going to introduce themselves, their roles, and how they either are or have been involved in unions. And I'll start with you, Ali.
Hi, I'm Ali. I'm a curator at the Herbert Art Gallery and Museum. I've been a Unison member for most of my employment here, and I started off being a workplace contact and eventually became a rep for about 9 years before I decided to give it a rest.
Thank you. Eleanor?
Yeah, I'm Eleanor. I work for the V&A and I've been a union rep and particularly a women's rep for the past 2 years or so. And before that, I was involved in Prospect Union as well.
Thanks so much. And Rachel?
Yeah, I'm Rachel Shepherd. I'm a freelancer now, and I've worked in museums and heritage for 15 years. And my last job was in a small museum, and I was a Unison member.
Thanks a lot. So we're going to dive straight in. We're not assuming any particular knowledge of anyone who's attending this session. So we're going to start with some of the basics. And the first thing we just want to talk about is what unions do in a workplace and for their members. I'll start with you, Eleanor.
Yeah, so the basic thing a union is really there for is to help and support workers. So usually they're entirely member-led, and they're there to negotiate with the employer to make sure everything is fair and there's equal representation, to really cover all the basics, but to also help you in cases of emergency, to make sure all aspects are covered. So I think it's always really useful, especially in the current climate, to really join in. You can be as active as you like, but it's just good to have the backup.
Yeah, I'd like to add that for me, unions, they work on a national level. They can campaign for general things like the living wage. They work on a regional level or a sector level, depending how your union's structured. On the wider workplace level, so it might be that you're going through a large range of redundancies or looking at the T's and C's, so that way your union will be campaigning across the workplace. But then also on the individual level, that's when perhaps if you've got a grievance with someone or someone's put something against you, it's to help you through. So, there's about four different levels there, and I want to absolutely echo what Eleanor said, that it's really about what you put in. So it's not a service you're paying for, it's about what we together put in and how we're stronger together. Although that sounds like a terrible catchphrase that someone I don't like use. So
and Rachel?
Yeah, well, I found as a member of Unison, it was very, very helpful. And certainly when there's issues in the workplace, it's someone who will always support you, who will always be on your side. And no matter how well you get on with your managers and your colleagues and your trustees, it is really useful to have independent advice and someone who will back you up. And also someone who's been in that situation before, because sometimes when you're ringing, it's the first time you've encountered something, whereas they deal with it every day. And I mean, in my last role, I was the only member of a union within my organisation. So I had to, rather than having a museum rep, I dealt with the branch rep. So her knowledge was regional and dealt with a lot of charities. So yeah, it was really just invaluable.
I think there's so much that unions do as well. I know something that I've accessed through the union that I've been a member of this year is unions also offer a lot of training, and not just training in being a rep, but training that can help you in your general career, and not even your sort of work life. Some of it's personal life related. I know certainly my union have been making quite a concerted effort this year to do more of that kind of training online. Now that we're all so familiar with Zoom, I think it's become really common as well. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about what roles exist in unions. Rachel, I'll come to you first.
I think someone else is probably better to explain that than me, because I was a member. I didn't become a rep or get involved like that. So I think probably someone who's been on the inside is better to answer than me.
Well, I think it's quite useful to talk a bit about the difference, because anyone in a workplace can be a member of the union. And then if you choose to get more involved, you can become a rep, right? So you are then helping the members when there's issues, and in the kinds of things that we talked about that unions do, you can be their representative. That's what we mean when we say representative. It's not always clear what we're using an abbreviation for. So you have your members and you have your reps, and then within that you have reps for different things. And I think maybe Eleanor could elaborate a bit on that from your role.
Yeah, sure. I would also just like to add, though, that there's a middle ground, which is an advocate. So you can be an advocate for your union, which means you're a little bit more involved than just being a member, but you don't necessarily like go to the big meetings or do any disciplinaries or anything. You're just more of like a spokesperson and an easy contact. But yeah, within being a rep, you can there's like a committee depending on how big your branch is, and you sort of fall through the regional sector, and then you have your own branch, and you have a branch contact that relays back, and then you have individual reps for different areas. So you can have an LGBTQ rep, you can have a green rep, a women's rep, which is what I am, then you have like a secretary, a treasurer. So it all sort of forms a kind of committee, so that when you have smaller committee meetings to discuss what's going on, you have that point of contact so that you can easily access everything, and so that everyone knows who's best to go to for certain things almost. So it's really useful to be aware of who is doing what as well. So in our union, we have a notice board, but we have sort of ID cards, so that if it is a particular women's issue, they can come to me. If it's someone that's not comfortable with that, we have the other reps listed as what they can do. But then again, it also comes down to just who you are comfortable with, who you have that relationship with, or if you don't know anyone at all, you can come and meet us and sort of speak and just pick who's best for you. But yeah, there is a lot of different roles you can do within the union.
And I think I just want to touch on something from that as well, that organizations that have multiple sites might have multiple branches. So thinking of my workplace, the British Film Institute, we have 4 sites, 2 inside London and 2 outside London. And we have one branch that focuses on one of the London sites and another branch that covers some of the others, with a bit of a merging in the middle, depending on job roles. But we work really closely at committee level with the unions to make sure that we're getting the best people from within our reps for any representation that needs to be done, because we are ultimately the same union. We're just divided up almost for administrative purposes, I suppose. Yeah. Ali, what would you be able to reflect on some more about that?
Yes, I think sort of similar to Eleanor, I started off as a workplace contact, which sounds like the advocate kind of role, and that was just being the conduit, and I found that a really good way to get started, to see how I felt about being more involved in the union. And also, perhaps if you've got a rep, it's really helpful to have someone like that to just perhaps manage the notice board, or perhaps write the newsletters. It's someone who can do that sort of in-between role. I think the other role, quite a lot of my time I was the only rep, but certainly depends on, particularly this year, you've mentioned health and safety. There is a possibility of being a health and safety rep, and I find, I'm in a medium-sized organisation, and certainly that can be really helpful, as you can better advocate for your colleagues' health and safety as well.
Definitely. I think health and safety reps in 2020 will have been overloaded. I know, thinking about my workplace, we've had weekly health and safety meetings between we also have a Unite branch at my work. We're very union covered in my workplace, but we've all been meeting together with the organization's health and safety staff to kind of all advocate for everyone's needs, which has been really important this year particularly. I'm wondering about, perhaps the next question is to think about how people can decide what union to join. Now, I will preface this with, we are not going to tell any of you here what union you should join, but how can you approach making that decision? I'll come to Ali first, if that's okay.
Yes, I mean, for me, it was quite straightforward. One of my friends invited me to join Unison. It was at the time the largest represented union in the workplace. But obviously you can go to sources like to see what agreements exist. So when I was with the council, there was agreements for quite a lot of the different unions. And I think probably at the time there was at least 3 unions recognised within the council. And a lot of the agreements meant that we'd work together and work collectively for the good of the whole organisation.
And Rachel, what's your experience of making that kind of decision?
Yeah, so I think for me, my first union I was in was PCS, and then I moved to Unison when I moved jobs, and part of that was to do with the setup of the organisation. So the first one was within the civil service, so they had Prospect and PCS within the organisation, so I talked to both their reps, spoke to them, and because mine was a more visitor focused job, PCS seemed to cover what I needed a bit more. And then when I moved, there wasn't a union to go to. So I sort of Googled it and looked round, and I called Unison, and they said, yeah, we cover museums in your area, we represent other small museums, independent museums, so they're not council, they're trustee run. And that's how I decided. But so you can decide on job, or if there's more than one union within your organisation, which one feels represents you the best. But I would say no matter which one you choose, go with one.
Definitely, it's better to have that representation at some point. Eleanor, I think you can reflect on this as well. I know you've been a member of multiple unions in your working life.
Yes, so it's quite a good example with me, because when I first joined a union, it was Prospect, but it was also I didn't have any knowledge of any of the unions in that workplace, and I didn't have any knowledge of who anyone was, any reps or anything. It was just an email landed in my inbox and was like, oh, join the union. And I had never really joined one before. I didn't really know what it was about. So I joined it just in case, sort of thing. And I had really no contact or input with them. And that's not to say bad things about Prospect. It was just how the organisation was run. It was such a big organisation that I was really a very small ant in it. And because I didn't really need them, they never sort of came up. But then I moved to the V&A and I joined PCS, who at the time were actually unrecognised, and the 2 other unions were recognised. So I joined PCS though because they had such great potential, and they were really well organised, and I knew that they were on talks with being recognised. And I also knew that it's not necessary to actually be recognised to still achieve things with the union. So it may be that thing of like, people are telling you, oh, this union is recognised, so you should join them. It's not necessarily the best choice to join it just because it's recognised. They can still do a lot more with recognition, but also, you know, it all depends on how much movement the union you want to join has, and how strong they are in the members. And you know, the PCS membership went from a very small membership to now, especially this year, having a very, very big membership. And I think we're one of the strongest unions in our museum at the moment. So you can really see, if you have that sort of perspective, you can try and see which union will lend you the best year. But also, I was contacted straight away when I joined by a person. You know, they came and spoke to me about the union, what they did, and it was just the PCS union that did that for me. And so then I instantly got a bit more involved, and I used them for a few personal things, and then they sort of approached me and asked me to be a rep, so I went through the training. And it was just like that thing of, it was the personal touch that did it for me, rather than before no one had contacted me other than an email. So sometimes it's as simple as that, really.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely good to have a kind of visible union presence and to know who people are that you can talk to in your workplace, and who those people are that you can go to for advice as union reps is really important. That visibility really makes the difference, I think, in how unions can exist. I just want to mention in the chat, Morwenna has posted the TUC link to finding a union, which is a really good tool that you can use to look for unions who are active in your area of work, which might be museums, but there might be people here whose job is part museum, part higher education, or local councils, or civil service. And so there are different unions that are best, and that tool can be really useful. And this is again why we're not advocating for any particular union during this discussion, although we all have experience of various unions. I'm going to pick up on something that you said, Eleanor, about you joined the union and then you decided to get involved in the union's work. Why did you want to get involved in the work that the union does in your workplace?
Well, it was when I joined, like I said, it was weaker than it is now. Not to say that it had no strength, but I saw the potential of what me helping could also bring to the table. So I went from being just a member to, I skipped the advocate and went straight to training for a rep. We also needed more reps, so it was like put to me in such a way that like I would be really useful as a rep, and I had experience of being in the room for disciplinaries and going to meetings, so I had some background in that anyway. And then I thought it was really crucial to become a women's rep, because there were areas in my workplace that I thought were being overlooked. So for example, the past year or so, we've been running a menopause campaign, which is to get our own menopause policy, because actually where I work is a lot of women that work there. And we also ran a period dignity campaign as well. So there was really aspects of it that I thought I could bring that personal touch to, because it's things I care about and things I know that are overlooked often in workplaces. But also it was that similarity, that sort of, well, I can help other people, so like why would I just stay as a member when I know I can help? And it's very busy all of the time, but I enjoy the distraction and I enjoy helping people and I enjoy encouraging other people to join up. And now we've got such a strong membership that it's been really worthwhile.
I see, Ali, you're nodding along there. Is that similar to your experience?
It's similar. I think before I joined as a contact, we'd gone round through a quite big round of redundancies, and we could see, although we'd had assistance from branch, you could see the real difference it can make when you've got someone on the ground that really understands the workplace and the intricacies, and also can help deal with perhaps the ones that don't necessarily need branch involvement, or be that first point of contact to help members when they're not sure about something that's happened and where to take it, I suppose. So I think I certainly found it really, really rewarding, as echoing what Helena says, supporting people, helping people. And usually it's sad, but usually you're helping people when they're having really tough times. So, I mean, it's fantastic actually hearing about the kind of work you're doing, Eleanor, because, the way I was, it was, as I say, often me, we were having at least one round of redundancies every year. So basically I was dealing with that, with T's and C's, and with things like grievances and disciplinaries. So it was, it's definitely helpful to have more than one rep if you're in a workplace of any size.
I think something underlying this that neither of you have sort of outright said, but it's implied, is that actually it's the professional development that you get from learning how to advocate for someone, how to represent someone, what to do in a disciplinary, and the understanding you get of your workplace issues, health and safety. That's such significant professional development that you can use not in a union setting, even sort of outside of that. The skills that you're taking, I think, are really useful. That's certainly something that I found, even not even having done a year as a rep, I already feel like I've learned loads of stuff. I'm going to come to you, Rachel, with a slightly different question from the chat, if that's all right.
Cool.
Just to talk a bit more about your experience of being in a smaller organization with like less of a union presence at all, and what that was like, and sort of what you encountered through that?
Yeah, so I worked for an independent museum, and there were about, I'd say, 10 core staff, so it was very small. It was a charity, so trustee run, and it was very different. I'd come from working for English Heritage, which was massive. Unions were very recognised. They were very involved with policy setting and everything that went on, pay rises. They were very, very active. And I joined, and there was no one in a union at all in the next museum I went to. So that's where I found out about Unison. I joined, but there was an attitude, I have to say, when I joined, that you were a troublemaker. It was a very kind of, I would say, slightly old-fashioned attitude. And rather than seeing unions as helpful and supportive and making life better for everyone, it was, you know, well, we'll just all look after ourselves and we'll do our thing and we're all friends and no one will ever fall out and nothing will ever happen and we'll all be okay. And that just wasn't, you know, in a workplace, that's just not kind of what happens. And you do hit situations where things aren't quite right, or they're not done in quite a fair way. And that's the times where, like, I was in a situation as a senior manager where I needed to call a union for advice on how to support another member of staff who wasn't in a union, and that was really useful. So I encouraged everyone to join unions, but people, I think, thought, oh, well, I don't need to, we all get on really well. But then when things did happen, they found there was no one who could be on their side. So I would say it's quite interesting in a small place. There is a resistance to unions, I found, because it's seen as a bit old-fashioned and troublemakery. But that's not even a word, sorry. But you are like a troublemaker.
Is that similar? Have you had any of those kinds of experiences, Ali?
No, I mean, the union was already established when I joined, but certainly I think we did a lot of time advocating with the management, and, you know, we went through about 3 different waves of management. So when I started, actually, the head of service, when we were within the council, was a union member, which is fantastic. So it felt a very safe place to join. But I have certainly been under much more old school type styles of management where I think they thought we were troublemakers. But I found actually getting on board with the head of HR, we were able to advocate actually how quite often things go a lot more smoothly if you've got the unions involved. So if you want to start a process and you're not doing it right, we'll put a stop to it pretty quickly. And so it's better to discuss, you know, usually we'd sit down and discuss together what was on the table coming up, so we can make sure it was done in the best possible way for the members and the workforce as well.
I think that's something that really can't be underestimated, how any of the unions or all of the unions in a workplace, or the members or the reps, can communicate with management, I think really defines what that relationship's going to be like. And there can be quite a tone change between I'm trying to phrase this in a way. When an organization changes leadership, there can be quite a big change in that relationship, I think, with unions. And I've seen that in a positive way, luckily, in my experience, in a positive way this year. But I think it can be a lot more complicated depending on what people's understandings of unions is and the background. Eleanor, I wonder how it's been being in a much larger organization with a much more substantial union presence.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting because I'd say for the first year or so, it was quite apparent that there was still that air of mistrust of, oh, what do the unions really do though, and oh, it's us against them sort of vibe. And then we've somehow turned that around, and we have almost every single manager now joined in the union. So it does make the conversation a lot easier when we are sitting down with HR and whatnot to go over terms and conditions, or at the moment we're obviously negotiating about redundancies, as a lot of museums are. So it does add favourably to have managers actually within the union. But then obviously we found difficulty with some members taking issue that management were in because they thought they were spying and such, sort of that vibe. So it is really difficult to find the balance between how you are they are just to help people, and yet some people have so much distrust of you, just because of that old story that, you know, the unions aren't really there to help you and whatnot. So it is quite hard to negotiate, but we have quite a lot of members now that we've sort of moved past that. But that's not to say that every negotiation is, you know, easy peasy. There's still, you know, a lot of discussions that happen that, you know, haven't gone the way that necessarily we'd like them to. But I think that's always going to be the case, as you know, sometimes the employer thinks they are right and they're not. So yeah.
Can I just add to that? As someone who things sometimes, you know, just happen around you and you don't have that rep. Yeah. I found when the union rep did come into those discussions, it was amazing how, because she understood the language, she was talking to people on the same level. You're talking to HR in a language you understand, whereas perhaps as a member or a worker, it's not your area of expertise. You can look up on the ACAS website, but actually it doesn't give the full picture. You don't really understand what's happening. And so to have people negotiating for you who understand the language and what's happening is really important.
Definitely. And I think, Ali, you wanted to come in too.
Yeah, I wanted to add that obviously managers can, and absolutely, as I say, our head of service was a union member. He, you know, a long time ago, but he would recuse himself from certain union meetings. So perhaps in that sort of meetings where you've got managers and employees, you know, perhaps it's thinking about how you set up those meetings and who's there at the right one. One of my co-reps for a while, when she was promoted to senior management, she remained a member but decided to step back from active roles in the union. And certainly you've got to think, I know sometimes it feels a bit like us and them, but actually managers are employees too. Sometimes they're making decisions, sometimes the decisions are being forced upon them. And, you know, it doesn't mean they're not going to get bullied or harassed in the workplace. So absolutely, everyone's got a right to join a union. And certainly when I was talking with new members, we'd talk about whether people wanted to go ahead and pay through the payroll. And that way, if they chose, the employer can look and see who's paying directly through payroll. Or if you prefer, you can pay through direct debit and only declare your union membership when you feel it's right for you to do so.
And trade union membership, I believe, is that you can't be discriminated on in the workplace for being in a trade union. I think that's right, if I remember my training correctly. So it is something that if your employer knows you're in a union, they can't do anything with that, or you then are able to claim against them for, say, unfair dismissal if it came to that. And I know that's something that you do sometimes hear about, people who've been targeted in a workplace because they are a union rep. And as Rachel said, in some places you might be seen as a troublemaker for putting that case forward and being a member or representative of your union, I think.
But certainly I think branches are usually really hot. If there's any whiff, you know, I've been in situations where I've been up for redundancy and the reps were like, right, if you're the one selected, you know, let's just check it's not because you rep, you know, it hasn't, I'm still here. But, you know, the branches often give you know, really strong support if they think anything like that's happening.
I'd like to come to one of the questions in the chat, just I think so people can understand a bit more about how and when a union might get involved. So one of the questions is, if you have an issue at work, at what stage of the, they put disagreement or situation, would you get your union involved? Is anyone want to take that first? I'll take a raised hand if anyone wants to go. Yeah, Eleanor.
Yeah, I mean, I would always say from the very beginning, like as soon as you can get a union involved, get the union involved. It's better to be safe than sorry. It may be something quite small, it may be something quite large, but with our help, we can always handle it so much better. We've had cases in the past where someone comes to us at the very last minute, and it's that sort of thing of like, well, we might not actually be able to help you because it's so last minute. Or we've had people you know, join on the day of their grievance or disciplinary, and it's very difficult to then be in a position to help you, because, you know, there's a lot of paperwork, and it has to be that you've been a member so that we can help you. Not to say that we can't help you if you're a non-member, it's just we can't represent you in the same way. Obviously we would still want to help anyone, but there is a certain amount of, well, you have to be a member for us to give you the full representation. But yeah, as soon as you can, get someone involved, even if it's just pulling someone aside and saying, I think this might be an issue, can you give me some advice? And if it is an issue and we can help you with it, then obviously we would say, okay, well, we can rep you, we can do this. Or if it's mediation you want, or if it's like colleague on colleague trouble, we can sit you down, you can get them a rep as well. It sort of works on both sides. And you have to remember as well, the other side is also always allowed a representative, especially if they are in a union. So it's not just like you get the favourable treatment. Both sides of any story are allowed their, you know, their representation as well. So important to remember that, you know, they will have their own help.
Definitely. Is anyone else like to come in on that as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll say, from having had a union rep sat with me in meetings and stuff, I think people think it's going to be kind of a big conflict, and it's like you see on the telly, you know, arguing, and it's really not like that. Everyone's there to get things sorted in a really fair way, and in a very, my experience, in a very friendly way, because no one wants things to get out of hand and too far down the line, because it's easier to resolve things quickly. So I would say, as when I was like the employee who had to bring someone in on a colleague and colleague situation, I left it a bit late. I did leave it because I thought things would get sorted out early, and we'd like to sit with the managers, and it kind of escalated. And I learned from then to bring people in really early. So when I had another issue, I phoned the union just to ask for their advice, what I should do, what the first steps I should take, and it got resolved really quickly then. So I think it does stop things escalating.
I think that's definitely a really good point. Unions are often presented as like a combative force, but for a member issue I helped with earlier this year, my only job was to take some notes in that meeting, so that the person in that meeting didn't have to think about writing things down, so they could focus on the actual content of that meeting and go away and think about it afterwards. So it's not all a big row in every, and that's not to say there's never rows, but it's not all about that, for sure. Ali, I think you were about to come in as well.
Yeah, no, just absolutely agree that the earlier the better. It might be something that comes to nothing, but as a union it helps to be aware of what might be in the pipeline, and we can offer sort of simple advice about recording your conversations, you know, that kind of simple evidence gathering, just in case you need to refer back to it. And as you say, I've sat in meetings where, you know, my main role has been to take notes or to prompt a member with things that we've prepared beforehand that they want to make sure that they say, or actually even occasionally translating between management speak and what clearly the person sat in the meeting, because it's actually quite scary to go in with management, even if it's quite a friendly situation. It's something you're not used to, and it can be quite overwhelming. So to have someone that you know is there to support you can be extremely reassuring.
I think another thing that helps about going to the union early is that union might then be able to see a pattern. If one person comes to union with an issue, it could be a one-off, it could just be that one thing. But if 3 or 4 different people have come with the same issue, you know there's something deeper there that needs a bigger investigation than a specific member issue, I suppose. And I think that is something that unions are in a position to do, maybe that isn't always something that can be done within a management chain or the organization, because you have that kind of cross-departmental, cross-organizational perspective, I think, too. I want to pose another question, and this is quite a broad question. So I just want to think a bit around what impact unions and their members have had on the heritage sector. You might want to think about some of the things we've seen this year, but in a more general sense as well. Any volunteers to take this first? Yeah, Eleanor.
Well, especially this year, I think it's so important to join a union, but it's so important as well for all the heritage unions to sort of join together, because a lot of heritage is in the exact same position at the moment with redundancies or no funding, or we're in this precarious position all because of COVID, and not necessarily has the government done enough. So you can see with the likes of the Tate, they went on strike, and they in the end settled an agreement, but they were on strike for maybe 2-3 months, and it took them a long campaign, but they also got the support of other unions. So people were going down from our union, people were going from other unions, and it was the same with the South Bank, the Royal Academy. But also it's important to remember that action like that can't always be taken. So for the VNA, we're in redundancy talks, but COVID, a second lockdown, has severely impacted the sort of action we may have been able to take if we wanted to. So, we'll then have to rely on other people's support as well, and getting the story out there and making sure that we can have an impact not just on the employers but on the government, because the government ultimately funds the museums, and then therefore they get the relay. So it's not just all about the employer, it is often the government, and it is important for unions to have enough impact to then take things to the government.
Definitely. Ali, what would your thoughts be on this?
I have to say, I have to confess I've been a little bit out of it this year, so I'm afraid I don't have anything else to add on this one.
That's right. I mean, it can be in the wider sense as well of the impact of unions, because a lot of movements we've had just in workplace improvements sort of nationally have been pushed by unions as well, I believe. Now, I feel like I'm suddenly giving myself a history test, but I know that some of the policies that have been enacted have come from unions as well.
Yeah, like they advocated for the living wage, which is different from the national living wage, the minimum wage. So that's an important thing I see that unions do across the nation. They're looking to raise conditions within the workforce, which has only got to be a good thing.
Yeah. And I think just to add to the conditions in the workforce from a small museum point of view, kind of really advocating for best practice. And if you're not sure, you can call your union, your branch, and say, what's the best practice around this? What's that? So it kind of just raises the standards in general, because I do feel like smaller museums, and especially maybe volunteer-run museums who only have one member of staff and a lot of volunteer, they do kind of get left behind and don't feel that impact of the larger union stuff till much later. So I think for smaller museums, things like training and upskilling and finding out what other museums in your area are doing through that branch rep is really important, because you can become very isolated.
Definitely. There's a lot of power in kind of the relationship building that it can help you do to find out about that best practice. And we've certainly seen it at the BFI. Obviously, we're a cinema, and there are so many other cinemas in the country. And we've been having some meetings through our union with other cinema reps to talk about how their cinemas are reopening, and the best practice there has been really useful to kind of see what everyone is doing this year, but I hope that continues into a more general discussion as well. You've kind of touched on something, I think, through these discussions about the first steps to joining a union. Now, there's something a little bit more complex added here, is that they're asking about whether you need a certain number or percentage of employees on board to do so. So I suppose there's two sides to that. Anyone can join a union, but it's what you then do with that membership that comes next. I wonder, Ali, maybe if you can reflect on that.
Yes, well, hopefully my training's not so out of date, but obviously, absolutely anybody can join the union, and I think it is important to find the union best for you. But when you reach more than 50% of the employees, and management might try and count your 0-hour contracts, and we always look at permanent sort of staff in terms of that. Once you reach 50%, and that can either be within a single union or unions that have different unions that have agreed to work together, that's the point where you can go for recognition, and that agreement gives the unions a greater status within the workplace and a greater ability to act and interact with the management.
Definitely. Any other reflections on that area?
I would just like to say for us, when we finally got recognition, it'd been a long campaign to get recognition, and it was a bit more complicated because we were recognised for certain contracts. So when the museum itself changed contracts over from civil service, they went to an enterprise contract within house. So we were recognised for civil service contracts, which was one half of the staff, and then not for the others. So when we were still working, we were working on behalf of everyone. So we were signing off on terms and conditions and contracts and such on behalf of everyone, but technically we were only recognised for civil service. So that's why we kept pushing recognition, because as we did keep building up our membership, and then it turned to be almost all of the membership was going to be on an enterprise contract, it did make things easier to eventually get the recognition, but it also sometimes depends on the employer. So like we were also recognised in terms of being part of the 3 unions that were there, so we could work collectively as a trade union side, but it was sometimes there was a few hiccups in that like sometimes the other unions perhaps would act slightly differently because they were fully recognised and we were only partially recognised. So sometimes there's like little hiccups like that you need to sort of iron out to get the full sense of the picture. But yeah, it definitely, recognition can help, but it's not the be all and end all. You can still achieve without it.
And has anyone anything else to add on that topic particularly? Fabulous. I want to move on to something else that's come up in the chat, and this is quite a difficult thing, and it's partly with unions and partly with your own rights as an employee, but I think it's quite important to address. If you are in a situation with management and you need to have meetings, and this could be a disciplinary, could be redundancy, could be anything, but you are sort of struggling in your relationship with them and you are worried about telling them you want a rep to come with you, what can the union do in that scenario to help you?
I mean, I think the union can reassure you, and you know, hopefully if the union can have a relationship with the management, they can advocate for why people are coming along. I mean, obviously anybody, whether they're a union member or not, usually within the company's policies, there'll be a right to take someone with you, and that could just, as we said before, just be a friendly face or a note taker. That usually has to be another employee. I've come across a situation where someone wants to bring their mum along, and that's not necessarily appropriate unless you're colleagues. So it's hard. I can get why it's scary. I think part of the advantage of being a rep, particularly for as long as I have, you start getting scared of management. You start really kind of thinking, you know, they're people and they make mistakes, and actually we can help them correct those mistakes as well. But, you know, obviously that's easy to say from my side and my experience, but I would always encourage you just to keep at it. And perhaps if you felt more comfortable, as a rep, I've been the liaison. I've been saying, yes, I'm the one coming along, although some places will say, do check your requirements, because sometimes it will say if you're invited to a meeting, you must inform ahead of time who you're bringing with you.
And I mean, from my point of view, where I was in a position where it was very difficult to bring a rep in on one occasion, I actually asked my branch rep to do the emailing for me and say, I will be attending this meeting with Rachel on this date, and please, any communication went through her. So I actually didn't have to deal with it. I was at the start of my career, I was very vulnerable. I had no idea what I was doing. And she was amazing. And she just kind of took over the situation so that I didn't have to deal with it. So there is that way of dealing with it as well. You don't actually have to tell them. Your rep can and speak on your behalf if you need them to.
I think something that's also quite important is knowing your workplace policies before you need them. So if you haven't done that thing that you always have to do in your first week of reading every policy on the intranet, strongly recommend doing it, whether you're thinking of joining a union or not. Read the policies, because you never know when you might need them or when someone else might need them. And this is especially in terms of things like, can I bring someone to a meeting and who does it have to be? And also the pushback that you're allowed to give on that meeting can't be sprung on you as a surprise. You can't have that. You can say, no, it needs to be when my rep is available. They will communicate with you. And it might seem scary, but as Rachel said, you can have your rep do that for you. It doesn't have to be you. And it can be very difficult. Eleanor, what else would you share on that?
Yeah, I agree. And it's that thing of like, I know you're scared maybe to tell them that your rep is coming, but think about how much more scary it is if you don't have anyone with you. Yeah. It's sort of that scary territory. So I would definitely, you can get your rep to tell them if you wish, but also like it's completely in your court. So even if the letter is like, the meeting is happening on this day, be there. If your rep cannot make it for that day, then it's not going to be on that day. You can stress that as much as you like, or you can get the rep to stress that, but it's your choice of rep. So make sure that that person is there. You have to have representation. We've had issues in the past where the managers say we'll then request, or we'll just bring a different rep because this person is in on this day. And it's not about that, it's about who is repping that person. So you can give some pushback, and it is awful that people are scared to bring reps with them, but at the end of the day, it's much better to bring someone than not bring anyone at all, because you can say things like, oh, they're just taking notes, which most of the time, like we've said before, it will be a note-taking thing. Sometimes people think it's more of we're your lawyer, but we're not a lawyer. So we do know some of the employment law, that's what we're there for, but we're not a lawyer. So it shouldn't turn into something vicious or anything. But yeah, definitely always bring them if you can, or always ask if you're uncomfortable to get someone else to ask them to come with you. But yeah, definitely.
And I think that pushback can be, even if it's been sprung on you on the day, I'm just following up on the comments added to the chat, like you can still say, no, not today. I will be bringing a rep and they are not available today. Yep. I can still see that is going to be difficult. And for the second question that person's put as a follow-up, I would say it depends on your internal policies, whether you can say you have to put it in writing. There will be a procedure for that in your workplace. So familiarize yourself with that, because if your workplace aren't following their own policy, that's absolutely something for you to take to your union rep, regardless of the other conversations that your workplace is trying to have with you. We have got still a few minutes. So if anyone's got any questions, do put them in the chat now, because we are going to run out of time. I'm going to pose one of the other questions that's come through in advance. And this is maybe will come from the more difficult side of things to perhaps the nicer side. What would you say is the best thing about joining a union? And I'll start with Rachel.
Oh, it's having someone on your side. It just is the best thing when you don't know what to do, or you are in a difficult situation. Having someone who is there for you and you only. They're not there like HR are there for the business or the charity or the organisation. They're not really looking after your interests, and just having someone with you is just invaluable, I found. And also dealing with from the small situations to the bigger situations. I think for me, that's the most valuable thing you can have, as well as sort of you get the sort of, I don't know, it's like an insurance, isn't it, almost, that, these people, they will advocate on your behalf as well on bigger things for the bigger charities and companies.
I had the thought about it being like insurance earlier in the chat when we were talking about getting it in place before you have an issue, so that it's there for you when you need it. Eleanor, what do you think is the best thing?
I mean, I completely agree. It's that thing of the extra security that comes with it. But I'd also advocate for, you can have a social life from it. So if you're, for example, quite involved, you can go out with your members, you can go to courses together. you know, you can run campaigns together, which in itself creates a whole new social aspect. So it is also about that bringing of people together, people with the same like minds about equality and such. So, you know, we also joined in bigger things like the campaign for global warming. You know, we got members active in that. So there is that other sense of like bringing another aspect to the workplace where you get to know people and you have more things in common perhaps than you didn't expect. So yeah.
And Ali, what's your best thing?
Yeah, it's really sort of coming together as a group of staff, you know, with a common aim, and knowing that you've got those people around you that have got the same feelings and, you know, wanting to move us forward. And as a rep, it's being able to help people who, you know, as people are saying in the chat, perhaps quite often in a really concerning time for them. And, you know, and it's certainly been a great development for me to spend that time being a rep as well.
We've had a couple of extra of new questions added to the chat that I think are really, really good ones. Is it a good idea for a paid trainee or intern to be in a union? And then someone has added also, can volunteers be in a union? Ali, you're nodding. You must know the answer.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a lot of unions you'll find will have a payment level, a joining fee for unwaged members. So particularly if you know, you're on a very low wage or none, as a volunteer, absolutely join. I mean, obviously in terms of volunteers, they might have a different set of rights as to paid employees. So there might be different sets of policies that apply to them. But yeah, I'd encourage absolutely everyone to join a union, and, you know, even if you're employed and become unemployed, you can still change your membership to be like an unwaged member.
Yeah, I think when I was made redundant, I stayed in Unison, and I think it cost me £4 a year till I found another job. So it's not expensive, and you can stay in till you get another job or decide what you're doing.
Definitely. And another question I'm going to pose to you, Eleanor, how can you find out if your workplace has unions?
That's a good question, especially for the contrast for me with the first place. I didn't really know of the union existence. So the union should really have a space on your intranet sort of page. There should be an option for trade unions there, and so it should list which unions you have, but also the unions themselves should have their own union room or a space where they've got notice boards, but also if they're good, they should have communication. So, you know, there should be at least someone in every department that knows one of the unions that can pass on the message and tell you, oh, this is the union I'm in, but maybe you want to join this union depending on what your role is or what you do. But I'd say it is key to try and check as many areas as possible to find out, but also just asking people. I mean, you can even ask management. It might, if you've just started, you could just be like, oh, by the way, is there trade unions? They can't reflect that on you for just asking if they're there. So always ask someone if you can't see any signs or whatever, but there should be, you know, something that says they exist.
Something that's really nice in my organization is that at the kind of standard inductions, or at least in the pre-COVID times, there's a 5-minute space for at least one union rep to talk about the unions at the organization, which I think is really useful. That's such good practice that I think is not present everywhere, but it's really good that my workplace has that for new starters, especially. A few people in the chat are saying they've worked somewhere for a while and they've never heard anything about unions. It is possible that you may not have unions, is the true option, and you can still join a union, as Rachel has described her experience. Even if you don't have a union active in your workplace, don't let that stop you from finding the representation that you need. I've got a more challenging question. What if you don't get on with your rep? Ali, I think you're nodding.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that could be going on there. If it's literally just you don't get on, unfortunately, they are there to represent you, so they have to do that job. You know, I've been called, I've been asked not to represent someone because their manager thought it'd be really awkward, and I said, tough luck, I'm this person's rep, this is my job, we're not calling in branch. But if that person's not representing you and not listening to you, I would go to branch and explain this. Sounds like there's a conflict. Sometimes there is a conflict of interest and you have to remove yourself from the situation and ask someone from branch or another rep to come and assist with the member.
This ties into a question that came in on Eventbrite, and I think the answer is exactly the same. The question that came in was around what if there's so many members in my union that my needs aren't being represented by the people that are available to me? What if other departments are getting all the focus and my needs aren't being met? And I think there is some going to the branch as well in that case might be necessary if you've exhausted all the conversations you can have within.
I'd also say, become a rep, make sure there's representation in your area, or at least a workplace contact. I mean, that's the best way you can make sure it's across. I mean, sometimes in the large redundancy situations, like there is absolutely no magic money tree, and I've had to balance, someone's going to go, I can't magic jobs for everybody. So it just really depends how the reps are doing, but they're there to represent everyone. So if they're not, that is a problem.
And I think we're 2 minutes away from the end. So I'm going to end on just one final question. As if we haven't sold unions enough to you in this session, what is the single most important reason you'd tell someone to join a union in the heritage sector? And I'd love to hear 3 different answers, so you can't just say same. And the first person I'm going to choose is Eleanor.
I guess it's just with the heritage sector, I'd say the threat of privatization is ever growing, and so I think it's really important to have a strong union to make sure that your employment rights are being met within that sector, because it's different, every sector is different, so we can't be lumped in with everyone else, and I think that's a really massive issue that's coming more and more ahead. And with the current COVID crisis, there's a lot of funding needed, and so it's important that your museums and your heritage sector is not trying to cheat itself and cut corners and get rid of staff when it needs the staff and all that sort of thing. So if you've got the insurance of unions that can fight that for you, I would say that is a bonus.
And Rachel?
It's kind of reiterating what I said earlier. It's having someone in your corner, it's having backup and the advice, and someone who knows what they're doing when you might not know what you're doing. And I think that is, when you are in a very vulnerable situation, having that support is invaluable. And
we'll end on Ali.
Well, for me, with a government that's looking after the top sector of the population, we, the workforce, have to band together and look after ourselves and advocate for ourselves.
Fantastic. The perfect note to end on. I hope that we've really given you all the information that we possibly could about unions. Thank you so much for everyone for attending. Thank you so much to Ali, Eleanor and Rachel for your time on this panel. It's been really great to spend this time speaking with you. And that is the end of our session. I will close the room shortly, and I will stop the recording.